Director for IEC, and also I'll be joined by the Executive Director, Sarah, of Citizens Utility Board, Sarah Moskowitz. So really quick before we get into the full conversation, I just want to talk about the agenda and some ground rules. I'm going to give a quick introduction about IEC, who we are, what we do, give a brief introduction for Sarah, and then pass the mic over to her to give a presentation. We will have Q&A afterwards, and then I'll give a little bit of an update on the Clean and Affordable Buildings Ordinance and how you all can plug in. In the meantime, utilize the chat to ask questions or leave comments during the presentation. Just ask if you're not speaking, stay on mute, and just keep calm and civilized. I know a lot of folks have different opinions about building decarb, but we want to make sure we're being respectful in this space. So with that, really quick background about IEC. So we've been around since 1975, and our mission is to safeguard Illinois. So it's people, it's plants, it's animals, and the natural systems that we all depend on. We do this work through education, advocacy, and movement building. Currently, we have over 100 different environmental organizations and 500 individuals across the state that support us in building out that movement. And what exactly do? We get asked this a lot, but one of the main things we do is we influence decision makers. So that's either through just general education about environmental issues, but also advising when and when not to support certain issues that could affect the environment. Internally, we work with our members to coordinate, make sure that we're using our resources in the most effective and efficient manner, so mobilizing supporters, and then just also acting as folks that can hold electeds accountable. So a lot of folks know about our famous annual scorecard that we do at the state level, and one that we've also started doing at the city level as well. So part of our role is just to be representative of the environmental community here in Illinois. So now I want to pass it over to our presenter today, which is Sarah Moskowitz. She has a ton of experience in working with energy and working on lowering utility bills for all Illinoisans. She has been with the Citizens Utility Board for the last 20 years and was recently became the Executive Director. Also has a background in and previously had a bachelor's and master's degree at the University of Chicago. So it's really an honor to have Sarah here with us. And with that, Sarah, I'll go ahead and pass the mic over to you and stop sharing and I'll let you share your screen and get into the presentation.
Thank you so much, Iana. Thanks for inviting me. If I knew I had to keep calm and civilized for this presentation, I never would have agreed. I get really riled up, especially when I start talking about gas utilities, but I will do my best to maintain my composure. Let me try to share my kind of folksy slides here. All right. Okay, great. I think that should do it.
Yep, perfect.
Okay, cool. I'm minimizing looking at myself because that would be very distracting. All right, great. So it's nice to see all of you joined. I am happy to see some familiar faces and names, some folks I've never met before, but as Iana said, I've been working in this space for a long time, and I could talk about this stuff for many hours. So I will do my best to be succinct so that we have plenty of time for some Q&A. But first I want to just apologize in advance because I know that this presentation was billed as the real cost of clean buildings. Probably what I'm going to be talking mostly about is the real cost of the status quo and why it's not sustainable. The real cost of clean buildings is a lot of what we need to figure out, and a lot of it varies from building to building. A lot of my purpose today in this talk will be to introduce the issue, introduce the problems. I know a lot of you are probably familiar with them, but I will be doing so from a very markedly consumer standpoint, as opposed to the environmentalist standpoint that you've probably heard a lot, equally valid. But because our enemies will be using the affordability argument a lot, in combating building decarb. I want to talk about kind of the nonsense of that, because the status quo is so unaffordable, in addition to unhealthy and bad for our climate. So Citizens Utility Board, or CUB, was created in the early 80s by the Illinois General Assembly to represent the interests of utility customers, residential and small business utility customers. So we work on all different levels of utility oversight. We work before the Illinois Commerce Commission. We work in Springfield trying to get more consumer-friendly laws passed or prevent consumer-unfriendly laws from being passed. We do a lot of consumer education and outreach. We have a great website. I'll highlight later on in the presentation some of the resources that we provide for free. We also have a toll-free hotline at CUB that folks can call if they have questions and complaints about their utilities or about some of the clean energy incentives that are out there. More and more, our staff are helping guide people through the process to tap into the growing clean energy economy. But if you have a question or complaint that you can't get straightened out on your own with your gas utility, electric utility, we have contacts at those companies that we can get in touch with on your behalf. And when you're calling us, you're also helping us stay relevant, because although I'm a utility customer, all my staff are utility customers, we're really relying on all of you, all of your neighbors and all of our neighbors and all of our fellow Illinoisans to keep us apprised of what's going on out there, so that we know when we need to hold a press conference or talk to legislators about getting something passed to do an end to some wrongdoing, or take a company to court. We do get some grants to work on some of our policy goals and to conduct some of our grassroots outreach, but we are very much a member-supported organization. So if you like what we do, you want to support us, you want to help us keep all these services free for all Illinoisans, please consider joining CUB. So gas in buildings is a big deal, and it's a big deal in our state. Illinois is one of the top states in the country to use natural gas in buildings, as this chart here shows. And when we're talking about building decarbonization, I just want to make sure that everyone is clear that what I'm talking about is making sure that the energy that we use to heat our homes, cook our food, all that good stuff is coming from clean resources that don't result in carbon emissions. In most contexts, this means electrifying or switching from a gas based source of heating and cooking to an electric one. Now, with the caveat that that is contingent upon our electricity not coming from carbon sources, right? It assumes the decarbonization of the electric grid, but that is on track here in Illinois, and in fact, in a growing number of Midwestern states, thanks to progressive clean energy laws. So an overview of some of the points I'm going to touch. Why do we need to do building decarbonization? To fight climate change, of course. Doesn't make sense to be combusting fossil fuels in our homes. And like I said earlier, we want to take advantage of the increased renewables that are powering our electric grid. To promote better health, guess what? Burning fossil fuels in our homes is not good for us. And then finally, to save money, and that's what I'm going to be harping a lot on because I am at CUB and we are obsessed with saving money. Want to mention real quick that our gas bills, and I'm going to be talking a lot about people's gas. I apologize to my friends who live outside of the city of Chicago. I know not everybody lives in Chicago. I know that there are a lot of Ameren, Illinois customers and some NICOR customers probably on this call, but I'm going to be focusing on the city of Chicago because people's gas prices are so out of control. They're so high that this issue is coming to a head in the city of Chicago more quickly than it is in other areas. In fact, the situation in the city of Chicago is so egregious that we are really being forced to confront this issue earlier than some other jurisdictions that have normally kind of paved the way for some of these issues for us. So in Illinois, we're never first, or usually we're not first to innovate in some kind of clean energy policy, like the smart grid, all that stuff. We got to learn from mistakes that were made in other states. However, because people's gas bills are so unaffordable here, we're not going to have that luxury. So I'm going to mostly be talking about people's gas, but a lot of the concepts do apply, although perhaps not in as extreme a way, in NICOR, North Shore, and Ameren territories. And the people's gas bills are made up, and all gas bills are made up, in Illinois at least, are made up of two main components. There's the cost of maintaining the delivery system, which is the portion of the bill that your gas utility makes its money off of. And that's the portion that they have to go to the Illinois Commerce Commission when they want to request a rate hike, all that rigmarole. Then there's the cost of the supply itself, the actual gas commodity. And that is not state regulated. That's just subject to the market prices. The utilities have to procure that gas on our behalf and pass it on to us without a markup. And they are subject to an audit after the fact by state regulators to make sure that they did a good job of that. So there's the gas volatility of the commodity itself, but then there's the delivery costs, which is part of what contributes to, that's actually all of what contributes to the natural gas utilities bottom line. So this kind of blurry slide here basically demonstrates how our electric grid is getting cleaner, so that if you have a heat pump, the emissions that you are causing by using that heat pump are going down over time, as opposed to if you had gas equipment, of course, those emissions are staying the same. This chart was created before the passage of CJA, so I think the actual numbers are a little different, but overall, that's the point I'm trying to get across by including it here. So about the climate argument in favor of building decarbonization. This is part of a series. I think other more environmentally focused organizations do a really good job of driving this home. But basically, natural gas is not good for our climate. It's predominantly methane. Methane is a very potent greenhouse gas, and burning gas is a huge source of carbon pollution throughout the world. Not to mention the fact that the process of extracting that gas out of the ground isn't very good for our environment either. Just a little bit more about how many metric tons of carbon dioxide are emitted over the past couple of years, thanks to the burning of natural gas. And here's the part, though, that really freaks me out. The more I read about the health impacts of burning gas in our homes, the more terrifying it becomes. There's a lot of pollutants being emitted into the air outside, but also into the air in our homes from cooking and burning gas in our homes. Carbon monoxide, my carbon monoxide detectors in my building go out every once in a while because we have a really ancient boiler. It's very scary. Benzene, a major source of blood cancers. A recent study, I think, showed that cooking with gas in your kitchen can basically be as bad for you, if not worse, than as living with somebody who smokes cigarettes, chain smokes cigarettes. And so it's actually pretty bad for you. It leads to a lot of deaths and costs in the state of Illinois. And it's not new. We've known for a long time that gas stoves are bad for us. I don't know if anyone saw back in the spring, some folks dug up some documents from the American Gas Association showing in the early 70s that it already knew about and had concerns about indoor air pollution. So this whole thing that it's a bunch of crazy environmentalists just kind of making stuff up to put this industry out of business is patently false. But here's where I'm going to dwell, because I'm with Cub, right, is the affordability argument in favor of building decarbonization. This slide has a lot of words on it. I will not read them to you, but I will summarize the gist for you. 10 years ago, our state legislators in Springfield passed a law that allows the gas utilities to automatically raise our bills to cover the costs of what they claimed would be necessary safety improvements. So traditionally, under traditional rate making, when a utility wants to do infrastructure spending, they have to go to the Illinois Commerce Commission, Cub gets involved, other stakeholders get involved, we intervene in those dockets and we battle it out and make sure that these costs are prudent, just, reasonable, all that good stuff. They basically got our General Assembly to allow them to bypass that persnickety process, very inconvenient for them, and just pass those charges on to us automatically. There is a review after the fact, but in this case, it's way after the fact. In fact, right now we are looking at that spending for People's Gas from back in 2016. So People's Gas, of all the Illinois utilities have this, but People's Gas is the one that's really gone to town on this. And they have embarked on a multi-billion-dollar natural gas infrastructure replacement program that was supposed to be done just to focus on safety, but instead they, of replacing the most dangerous pipes, they decided to overhaul its entire system. But have failed to achieve any safety improvements in proportion to the billions that they've spent on this. Engineering study has shown that there's been no noticeable reduction in failure rates in their pipelines, and a state-ordered audit uncovered rampant mismanagement of the program. And the projected costs for that program have spiraled out of control up to perhaps $11 billion before it's all said and done. So this is why, if you live in People's Gas territory, your bill might look something like this. This is an email actually that we sent out maybe even today. My colleague, this is a picture of her bill, and you can see here between the customer charge and the qualified infrastructure plant charge, we call it the QIP, she's paying over $60 for only $2 worth of gas. $53 in essence in fixed costs before you even use any gas. And this is weird, all right? If you live in the city of Chicago and these are bills that you are used to seeing every day, this is not normal. When I go to other states for a conference and I give a presentation about the situation in Chicago and say fixed costs are over $50 a month, people come up to me afterwards kind of smirking, saying like, oh, you misspoke, you said 50. I'm like, yeah, I meant 50. They think I meant to say 15. No, it is 50, and that is unusual. And that's before you use any gas, and it has been going up year after year. Meanwhile, the gas utility has been enjoying 6 straight years of record-breaking profits, while we are paying more than our neighbors in NICOR territory or Ameren territory. Fixed monthly charges, like I said, over $50 a month. And they're not done. This could continue to increase our bills. And right now, in fact, the gas utility is back before regulators asking for a $402 million rate hike. And what really burns me up, see, am I still being calm and civilized? All right. What really burns me up is that People's Gas executives, when they go on TV or radio to justify this, they say, we haven't had a rate increase in 9 years. Okay, they haven't gone to the Illinois Commerce Commission and formally requested a rate increase through a docketed proceeding at the Illinois Commerce Commission in 9 years. However, they have been hiking up our bills via this surcharge, the QIP surcharge that was approved by the General Assembly 10 years ago. So they have been getting rate hikes. It just hasn't been with the oversight that we think that customers deserve and require. So on top of all of these delivery side of the bill hikes, of course, the gas commodity itself is subject to the vagaries of the market and is quite volatile. As you can see from this chart here, since when does this start? 1967, you can see all the ups and downs of the gas prices, whereas electric prices, both cases you're adjusting for inflation, have maintained relative stability. Prices now are between 30 and 40 cents or so a therm, I think. Last year before that, they had been really high, back down again a little bit. Hopefully it won't get high again when it gets really cold, but you don't know what it's going to be month to month. So we in Illinois have a lot of fascinating data, fascinating and heartbreaking data. This is a very beautiful screenshot of a beautiful Illinois Commerce Commission's website showing where you can access, if you really want to know, I can send you links, email me afterwards, where you can access tables showing the different utilities, credit, collections, arrearage, disconnections, all that good stuff for their residential and commercial customers every month. This was actually a lesser known provision in CEJA, basically forces all of the state regulated utilities to file these reports each month to the commission, in which they include all of this information by the zip code. And it's amazing. So this, I know you wanted to see it, right? Here's an example. This is the most recent one from Peoples Gas, and I don't expect you to be able to see it all, but this is what we have to work with. And from this, we can glean a lot of information, but long story short, it's bad. Illinois, amongst the states that require such reporting, is #1 in the nation for gas shutoffs. And surprise, surprise, BIPOC communities are the most affected. In Illinois, Black and Latino households are 2 times as likely to experience a disconnection compared to their white counterparts. Late fees. We can see how many people are getting charged late fees. And I'm focusing, like I said, on Peoples Gas. You can find all of this info about NICOR and about ComEd, about Ameren, but it's particularly bad for Peoples Gas. That's part of what's so interesting about it. I deleted a whole bunch of slides I had about these stats for brevity, although you see brevity is a challenge for me. But one of the stats is late fees. This beautiful image graphic here is a little dated, but I included it because it's nice looking. And it shows the darker red are zip codes with higher percentage of people who are assessed late fees. Peoples Gas makes a profit off of the late fees it charges. In a recent earnings call, they listed late fees as a reason for higher profits. In July, this is month before last month, over a quarter of Peoples Gas residential customers were charged late fees. And in 2 zip codes in particular, that number was over 50%. Just a quick sampling of some of those July statistics. So Peoples Gas has 805,666 customers. Almost 20% of those were over 30 days past due. The average arrearage was $702. Total arrearages was over $110 million. The total arrearages end up getting picked up by all of the rest of the customer base, right? So not only is this an affordability issue for the people who are behind on their bills, can't afford their bills, eventually those costs get written off, but what that means is it gets socialized across the rest of the rate base. So it turns into the spiral of higher and higher bills. And then again, of course, there are particular zip codes where it's really bad. So I just highlighted, no offense to anybody, I highlighted a couple of the zip codes where you had really high percentage of folks who were behind, really high average arrearage amounts. $1,000 for a lot of us might as well be $1 million to be behind on your bills. And you can see 48% over 30 days past due and 60621, 60636, 40% of folks over 30 days past due. And another thing I just want to highlight, these stats also show the number of business customers who are behind, how much they're behind by, how many got disconnect notices. Those numbers, of course, could could have other things going on behind them as well. It could be certain zip codes have more businesses just going out of business, and so they stop paying their bills, whatnot. But this is another piece of the data that I haven't really dug into, but it would be pretty interesting to look at kind of how this is hurting smaller businesses as well. So what is the alternative? Well, the alternative, if you tuned in to the first webinar of this Building Decarb series, one of the slides outlined kind of what you're switching your gas appliances for. So you have your gas range and you switch it to an induction stove. You have a boiler or a fossil gas furnace and you switch that to heat pump, either an air source heat pump or ground source geothermal heat pump. CUB did a study a couple of years ago now. I'm hoping to get some funding to renew it, looking at different scenarios of household customers and what the payback, the upfront costs and the payback period would be for customers switching from gas heat to electric heat in the city of Chicago. And we found that the payback period for that switch was a lot faster than we thought it would be. Now, unfortunately, that's because people's gas costs are so freaking high. But that doesn't change the fact that this is the case. And there is a very real financial incentive in Chicago, especially for people to make the switch to electric heat pumps. And I'm not going to get into, I deleted a whole bunch of slides about how heat pumps work and their phenomenal efficiency, how well they do in cold climates. That's probably enough to fill up several other webinars hosted by people who specialize in this sort of thing. But it's a viable option and people are making the switch. And just really quick before I move on, I'm not going to read all these bullets, but if your furnace is at its end of life, or if you're building new construction, it makes particularly good sense to start with electric as opposed to gas heat. So in my news feed just this morning, I saw this from the Financial Times. This is from today. The International Energy Agency, which is not a bastion of liberal environmentalist types, is about to release a report in which they say the world is at the beginning of the end of the fossil fuel era. And they believe the fossil fuel era that we are in right now will peak before 2030. This is big. This is more about, they're looking at the reality as opposed to kind of their ideology. Canary Media, this is like a media offshoot of RMI that launched a couple years ago. They put out this nice chart back early this year, looking at how Americans bought more heat pumps than gas furnaces last year. And that was even before you had these IRA incentives kicking in. So the transition is happening, even without these incentives, for financial incentives, for the reasons that I mentioned before, people not wanting to poison themselves in their homes, people not wanting to poison the environment. And now there are going to be more incentives. The IRA put into place clean energy tax credits for solar, geothermal, EVs, battery storage that are in effect now. Of course, you have to have a tax liability to benefit from that. So the IRA has also set up funds that will pass through the states to help low and moderate income residents transition away from natural gas. We expect those to be up and running via the Illinois EPA in the second or third quarter of 2024. And then, of course, we have other incentives. Illinois is one of many states that have a robust energy efficiency portfolio standard. So your gas and electric utilities are already required to offer efficiency programs. Illinois electric vehicle rebates, thanks to CEJA, are set to be going back into effect, I believe, November. There's our income qualified solar program, Solar for All. There's weatherization assistance available. And then there are more innovative programs and pilots coming down the pipe. There's the federal Solar for All through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. We'll have multi-state projects and state projects. The applications for those are due, it just got postponed till mid-October, I think. We're going to see more products there to help people actually benefit from solar. There's a networked geothermal pilot, multi-year project approved for the south side of Chicago. A number of stakeholders, including our friends at Blacks and Green, Cub is a part of it. A bunch of players are in that. And the first section of it is going to be just for planning. But basically, this is a pilot to check out what some of the barriers and challenges, but benefits and best practices for an actual distributed networked geothermal. So basically a geothermal system that can decarbonize an entire city block. So there are opportunities coming for more innovative solutions to this issue. And we're going to need every possible solution that we can get our hands on, and probably some more, because this is another reason why Cub is particularly concerned with this issue and why we are very actively trying to get people riled up about it, is that it's going to be bad if this transition away from fossil heat continues in an unplanned way. Because as gas service gets too expensive, or as the reality of how bad it is for our respiratory systems and how bad it is for the climate becomes more widely known, people who can afford and have the means to electrify and cut the gas pipe will do so, and that will leave the rest of folks in the lurch. So this is my exciting animation. Some of you may have seen it before. So you have right now a gas system, and you could replace people's gas in the middle of that with Nicor or whatever you want, where we are all paying for the distribution system costs. It's all spread out over all of the customers. But if you have a bunch of customers remove themselves from the utilities rate base, that money ends up having to be covered by the ones who are left behind. And like I said, if it's the folks who can't afford it who are left behind, shouldering more than their fair share now of the system, it's going to result in what has been termed the utility death spiral, where a decreasing rate base for upholding the distribution system means that there's not going to be enough money to uphold the distribution system, and the folks who are left paying for it, those charges will be higher than they can afford. And so this is a very real issue. Like I said, people are making the switch already. So the time is now, or past now, to start coming together and hammering out solutions for this. And we're going to really have to think outside of the box. I'm talking, the transition to natural gas for all of these things. This is the transition now away from natural gas for all of these things. This is going to be a gigantic societal project, and it's going to require a lot of stuff. It's going to require a lot of energy efficiency. It's going to require electrification, of course. For that electrification to actually be clean, it's going to require more renewables. It's also going to require load management. And I can't let this webinar go by without talking about this for a couple of minutes. And again, I apologize. I've been around the block. I've given a lot of presentations, so some of you might hear me repeat myself. But the way that we have been billed for electricity for generations now has divorced us from how the power system really works. So generally, we are turning on our lights and we are paying for our kilowatt hours, regardless of what time of day it is. But when we're paying for those kilowatt hours, we're not just paying for the electricity that we're using, we are paying for the electricity that we could be using. Our society has built a whole bunch of power plants that pretty much sit idle for a lot of the year, and they're just there ready to kick in if we all decide to turn on everything all at once. It's capacity. They need that capacity, that generating capacity. This is expensive. Traditionally, it's been bad for the environment because guess what those power plants are? They usually burn things to make that electricity. And it's added a lot of costs to what we pay for our electricity. So if we're getting ready to put all of this additional energy need, all this additional demand or load onto electric system, we need to be smarter about when we're using it. So that's why if you have an electric vehicle, it makes a lot of sense to be on one of the dynamic rates offered by the electric utilities. If you're charging your car at night when demand is low and prices are low, you can take advantage of that and charge your car for next to nothing if you are on with ComEd hourly pricing, or if you are on with Ameren, their Power Smart pricing product, which basically charges you a different rate per hour. Not for everybody, but I want everyone here to be aware of this, because this is going to be a more and more important dynamic, issue to keep in mind as we're thinking about electrifying everything. Because, right now, Illinois has summer peaks in electric demand because of air conditioning. But as we start to transition to electric heat, we're going to start seeing winter peaks. What kind of impact is that going to have on our electric system? I was talking to someone from another state recently, and they were all on board with decarbonizing. They were comfortable with the idea of putting the gas utility out of business. However, they were very uncomfortable with the idea of essentially giving that business to the electric utility. And as someone who's been working at CUB for over 20 years, I agree. So it's going to require very intense oversight of what is happening to our electric grid as well. And I want to make sure that y'all know I'm not forgetting that. And this is not, all of this beating up on the gas utilities is not implicitly like a giant vote in confidence for the electric utilities, because that's a problem too. I mentioned People's Gas is back right now asking for this $402 million rate hike. Well, all the electric utilities are asking for a rate hike right now too. And there is going to be a great need for some investment on the electric side to ensure that they can handle this transition. But it shouldn't be a blank check. It shouldn't be an excuse for them to, as we say in the industry, gold plate their system. Since it's just guaranteed profits for us. We need to make sure that these are prudent, just, and reasonable investments on the electric system. And part of that means paying attention to when the electricity is being used, utilizing things like battery storage to perhaps feed more power onto the system during those times of peak demand, maybe charging those batteries at times of lower demand so that we can level off these curves that you see on these charts here. And these charts are just basically, these are from today. I took screenshots of the real-time pricing programs that both Ameren and ComEd run, just showing what their hourly cost is right now if you're on those programs. And you can see there, it's lower than the standard rate today, at least for both. Okay, so we're going to need a lot of stuff in order to pull this off. We're going to need a trained workforce. We're going to need, like I said, rigorous planning on both the gas and electric side, thoughtful incentives for transitioning existing building stock, especially for people who aren't rich. Energy storage, like I said, more transmission. Haven't even talked about that yet, but that's going to be huge as well. All of the NIMBYism and issues around, do we want more power lines? That's going to be a thing. And I think we're going to see some people who traditionally have liked each other stop liking each other, and vice versa, as we start diving into the need to build out more transmission. And then energy efficiency is a big one. So there are a few ways that we can build some policy drivers to make this happen. Folks are already talking about a siege for gas, in which we will maybe require, this is kind of what's in the works right now. Strengthening energy efficiency programs on the gas and electric side, Gas has good efficiency programs, but guess what? A couple of their efficiency incentives include rebates for efficient fossil fueled appliances. Well, let's get rid of those, right? Something we're talking to the gas utilities about, or require newly constructed buildings to use efficient all electric appliances, and consider things like climate and health and affordability as we plan for the gas system. So essentially, initiating processes in the regulatory sphere, like at, say, the Illinois Commerce Commission, where stakeholders will actually be mandated to look at affordability, climate, equity, health, as we plan for the future of the gas system. And then locally, of course, we're already in the midst of fighting for the Clean Affordable Buildings Ordinance, or CABO, which I think Iana said she was going to talk a little bit about. There's been a lot of movement, especially since the change in administration in Chicago, to try to get this at the forefront of the new mayor's mind, to try to get this done sooner rather than later, especially with the People's Gas rate hike requests pending. If we could do something soon, that rate hike request is going to be decided November, December. And so it would be great to get something rolling here in the city of Chicago to send a message to the regulators that, hey, we are starting to plan for a phase out of fossil heating in the city of Chicago. So is now really the time to be sinking more costs into a system that is soon going to render itself extinct. So this is just something I was reading recently. I was reading one economist criticizing neoclassical economics, and said that basically we're going to need to come up with some new belief systems to confront and solve new problems of societal complexity. And that really resonated with me, because I've been thinking a lot about how we're going to tackle all of this, and trying not to be too daunted, but I feel confident that we can get this done together, but we can't pretend it's not happening. And we really have to come together and start hammering out, doing some hard work to make sure that it's done in a way that has the best possible outcome for all customers of the current gas utilities. Really quick, oh my goodness, I've been talking for so long, I'm sorry. CUB has a lot of resources about what you can do right now to tap into the clean energy economy. We have two different guides, a statewide guide and a Chicago guide to decarbonizing your home. We have guides about electric vehicles. We have guides about the different incentive programs that are out there. And we have guides about how to decode your bills and all that good stuff. It's all on our website, citizensutilityboard.org. You can find it under resources right there. And you can always reach out to any of us at CUB. We pride ourselves on being reachable. So thanks for bearing with me and for listening.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was a super informative presentation. I honestly learned a lot of things I didn't know before. I didn't know about the dynamic rate. I think that's actually really interesting, especially for folks that I know personally that want to get electric vehicles but are concerned about, you know, what is going to be the impact on their the utility bill. So now we can dive into questions. I know there were a couple in the chat, so I will try to go back to some of those. First, I see there's a question from Victor Koves, and he said, I live in Lincoln Square area and saw new homes and condos built with gas. Do you know why developers might still be doing that? My theory is gas stoves are still an amenity for luxury properties, so they just go with gas for everything.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of it. I think that is there's been kind of a lag in knowledge about the electric alternatives in the construction industry, even in the HVAC industry. I've talked to lots of people, including colleagues, who are trying to make the change in their own homes. And it can be a challenge to find contractors who are willing to sell them the stuff. They just don't have as much experience with it. They may have dated information about it. And there's a real status quo bias on a lot of different levels here. So And essentially, there's nothing yet existing in the city of Chicago that requires them to do otherwise. So that's part of why we're fighting so hard for this to get done in the city council.
I personally had a question. If you knew what the reasoning was behind that original like surcharge loophole that passed 10 years ago, I mean, obviously part of it is for profit, but what was their, I don't know if you know what their reasoning was at the time for why they needed to be allowed to sort of sneak in surcharges.
I mean, my super glib answer to that question would be to quote our lobbyist, who every time he comes back from Springfield shakes his head and says, Sarah, it's just an alternate universe down there. It's just up is down, as right is left. But I mean, honestly, I think they have a very powerful lobby, and they were able to argue that it was for safety, also able to argue that it's for jobs is a big piece. There's a labor piece to all of this as well. But yeah, they're super powerful. And we knew from the get-go that this was a money grab, but it unfortunately that reality isn't always that effective in Springfield, especially when it's such an esoteric topic. I think it can be really hard to rile up the public to contact their legislators about a surcharge, you know.
Okay, we have another question. Thank you for that response, Bobby. Thank you. We have another question coming from Jeff Boyle. Jeff, maybe you want to come off mute and express this? I want to read it, but I know there's also a lot here, and it seems like there's a lot of context.
Sure, I can do that. Thank you so much for the webinar. It's extremely helpful to hear what's going on with electrification overall and the pressure on rates and so on that are being worked here through CUB. So the question I have is, I've been working with a number of contractors in the Chicago area to get estimates for replacing our gas forced air system with air source electric heat pumps. And the estimates are coming in very high, mostly because these heat pumps require backup resistance heating. So in other words, very high wattage electric resistance elements in addition to the heat pump to basically cover the needs at very low temperatures. And I'm wondering if there are any other homeowners in Chicago, sort of like the Illinois Solar Energy Association, that are available for homeowners to sort of collaborate with and crowdsource information, like real world experience. Is it possible without going to like full passive house standards of insulation and windows and doors to get an air source heat pump to work without having an electric resistance backup? And the main reason is that going with those high wattage backups puts me in a position where you have to actually upgrade our electrical service, and that's significantly adding to the cost of the project.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the big question, is how do we pull this off affordably and in a way that doesn't require that backup? And that's something that is, I'm on all these listservs about the energy transition, and it's something that that is hotly debated. There are gas, you can keep gas. I've talked to a lot of people who just decided to keep gas as a backup, but of course then you're stuck paying that monthly fee when you might not ever need it. Then there's some folks are talking about I've talked to guys who are like, I have a wood stove, it's fine. I mean, that's just not going to be practical for everybody. So I think I like your idea of having a kind of a forum for people to talk about this. And I think that's a fascinating idea that folks, I wish I could organize that, because there's a need. I mean, we answer the phone at CUB and we can talk to people about what we've heard, but I think it would be great to have a forum. Illinois Green Building Alliance, I don't think they have such a thing, but that would be the kind of cool thing that they might be able to assist with, or they might have, I know they have forums like that for kind of on the contractor side, but for customers, I mean, beyond, going on Reddit or something, I like that idea a lot. And I think we're going to need something like that. And maybe that's something to keep in mind when planning in the city of Chicago, for this to happen. Part of what I think gets overlooked in a lot of these big kind of funding packages and grants for projects, that are starting to come out thanks to the IRA and other federal programs, is just the consumer education and outreach about it. And of course, since that's a lot of what we do at Cub, that's something that I'm always thinking about. So yeah, and I see there's someone typing some resources into the chat as well, probably better than my ramblings here.
Great, thank you. I'll check out the Illinois Green Building and see if they have any other resources. I've followed the Reddit threads, and there's definitely a lot of chatter around cold climate heat pumps. But again, I'm looking to actually get some real world experience from within the neighborhood if I can, the kind of conditions we deal with here and the typical housing stock in this area.
Well, we still have about a few more minutes left. I wanted to just open up the space for people if they have more questions. Feel free to add the chat, but also feel free to come off and mute if you want to raise your hand or have a comment or whatever. Okay. Hearing none, I just wanted to give a few things here. As Sarah had mentioned, there's the Clean and Affordable Buildings Ordinance. We expect that to be introduced on October 4th. That is what we are hearing now. As folks know, Chicago is basically getting into the middle of its budget season, so things can always change. But in October is when we expect that ordinance to come out. And we'd love for folks on this webinar, if you live in the Chicago proper, to contact your alder and tell them why it's important to support this transition to clean and affordable buildings. We also have another webinar. I know Palma's been populating a lot of the chat with this information, but we have another lunch and learn coming up on the 22nd, which relates to clean buildings and clean jobs. We had one previously on the 8/29 that was related to clean buildings and climate. If you want to watch that, we are at IL Enviro on YouTube. And then finally, if you live in the 40 and 47th wards, Sierra Club is doing the Clean Buildings event with the alders that are in those wards. So Vasquez and Martin. And I put the link to that registration there as well. Thank you all for coming out today. Thank you for listening in and taking the time to learn a little bit more about decarb. Again, talk to your elected officials, talk to your neighbors, talk about why we need to transition to clean and affordable buildings. Sarah, did you want to, anything else you wanted to add to close us out?
Thank you again for tuning in. I did see that Pastor O put a question in the chat, just cruising right through, and he said, is there any truth that in cold climate cities, the heat pump might be more costly than gas furnaces to operate? And I think you might be referring to an Energy Information Administration, which is a subset of the Department of the Federal DOE, statistic that People's Gas executives have been trotting out, saying that, hey, the feds are showing that it's more expensive to heat with electricity than with gas. They're looking at existing buildings with electric heat and not heat pumps. So there are, in the 60s and 70s, especially, some buildings in Chicagoland were built to be all electric. They use really inefficient resistance space heat, and they are very poorly insulated buildings. I know this firsthand because in my travels at Cub, I've been to some of the communities. There's a bunch of Niles and Skokie, these multi-unit buildings that just their electric bills are insane because it's this old heating technology. So there's a stat floating out there that it's more expensive to heat with electric, and that's based off of looking at the costs in the existing housing stock, which is primarily those buildings in the Chicagoland area. So that's if you hear that stat from anyone at People's Gas, they're not talking about heat pumps. They're talking about 40-year-old technology in uninsulated multi-unit buildings.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I think it was kind of covered under that that electric resistant add-on. That discussion kind of answered that question for me. But thank you for the further qualification of that. Appreciate it.
Okay.
And then there was another question that popped up in the chat from Joseph and Mr. Mara. Are there any utility accountability laws passed by other states that you think Illinois should replicate?
Very interesting that you ask. We are hoping to build on some of the momentum that we've seen in other states, such as Colorado, Maine, Connecticut, I think, where they passed laws doing things like preventing utilities from rate basing their lobbying costs and what have you, by introducing a bill to do that in Illinois. So I've been talking to our lobbyist about drafting something for next year. So yes, we've been very heartened by what we've seen in other states, and we're going to give it a go. Of course, with the caveat that sometimes Springfield can seem like an alternate universe, but it just, I mean, especially now given kind of the continuing fallout from the ComEd bribery scandal, et cetera, it would just, I don't know. You would think that now would be our chance to do something like that. So thank you for raising that.
Well, with that, I want to again thank everyone for joining us today. Continue to support the work that IEC and CUB do, and make sure to check out our other webinars. So thanks again, everyone, for joining, and we hope to see you on future lunch and learns with us.